Welcome back to the Anti-Diet Club podcast. We are kicking off season 4. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. My name is Tamsin and I'm here with my co-host Gillian. And just want to kind of dive into what we're going to be talking about in season 4 because we've got some really exciting stuff coming up. If you listen to the last episode of season 3, you'll know we're going to be starting a Patreon, and that is coming in the new year. And we are just finalizing the details of that now. But that is something very new for us. And it's going to be a great way for you to get some really exclusive content from like behind the scenes and exclusive episodes and all sorts of stuff is coming. And we've got some amazing guests lined up already, some of which we've already recorded. And it's just going to be like brilliant for like anyone who is wanted to dive in further to the anti-diet work. And today is no exception. We are going to be diving into fat-phobic families. In this episode, we wanted to cover more about how to cope during this time of year when you've got things like Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and lots of family gatherings that involve food and quite often involve food and body talk that maybe you are actually trying to move away from. But before we dive into that episode, I'm going to talk about what's coming up for us in our coaching practice, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions that we've had from listeners is, I think there's this assumption that we run a company together, right? And we don't. We run a podcast together, but we have our separate businesses, and you can learn how to work with us both in the show notes. But we both have some super exciting stuff coming up. I think it's the time of year that we both get a little bit, I mean, I'm speaking on your behalf here, but like, I think we both get kind of riled up at this time of year, right? Because you can start to see already the tension. And today's episode is no except it like really speaks to that, right? The tension that starts to build around food, around bodies, around those conversations. As we talk a lot about consumerism, how that starts to like put us on this roller coaster of like luxury and quote unquote indulgence and build us up for this kind of like mass diet culture injection in January. So we get riled up at this time of year and feel super passionate about offering some things, particularly for people that maybe are podcast listeners and aren't necessarily in a position to be coached one-to-one or join a group coaching program. Tamsin and I both offer loads of free stuff, and we've got some exciting things coming up. So when you listen to this episode, my masterclass that I'm going to be doing is probably about a week out, which is Thursday, the 24th of November, which I realize is Thanksgiving for you folks in the US, which I think is the majority of our podcast listeners at this point. So this might be an hour that you want to take away to escape from your family, your friends, diet talk, body talk, and join me for an hour. It's 7 p.m. GMT. So make sure that you remember the time difference. And my masterclass is free. It's called How Not to Hate Your Body. And it's going to be a 1-hour session. And I'm going to take you through my 7-step framework to overcoming body shame and to find acceptance in your body without the condition of shrinking, right? This is the 7-step framework that I work with in my one-to-one practice with clients. And there's going to be a Q&A afterwards. And if you can't make it, if you are going to be around the table eating turkey at that time, then you can still sign up and you will be emailed the recording. So if you're interested in that, there's going to be a link in the show notes to how you can do it. It's just my website, gillianmccollum.com/masterclass, and you can sign up for it and you will be sent the Zoom link. So super excited about that. Tamsin, what do you have on the cards?
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. So similar to you, I do get riled up this time of year. And what really kind of gets to me this time of year is the confusion about intuitive eating. I'm seeing so many adverts out there for what is labeled intuitive eating and listening to your body, but it's being sold as a weight loss tool. And I want to demystify all of this stuff so that you don't get caught out this time of year. And I'm providing a free webinar. It's actually on the 18th of November, which I think is tomorrow if you're listening to this episode, when actually it might even be the day of the episode. So it might be a bit late for you to join, but you can sign up and you'll get the replay exactly as Gillian said. So the 18th of November at 1 p.m. UK time. And I'm going to be diving into like how to start intuitive eating and how to not get tripped up with either diet culture noise or previous like diet culture thoughts that you might be having around food. It's called Intuitive Eating and Rejecting Diet Culture, and it's going to do exactly that. I'm just going to cut through all the nonsense. I hate when like people kind of get duped into thinking that something is going to be giving them this like dream weight loss. And what I want to do is dive into like all the things you're going to come up against so that you kind of go into it, especially if you're starting this like now in December and the new year, and you're thinking about healing your relationship with food. I want to provide that space for people to really know what to expect, because I know from my own experience, and I know from clients' experience, that when you come into this work, it can often be really disorientating because you're coming in with all those diet culture thoughts. So I want to break all that down and make it super simple for you to start off and give you kind of like more knowledge so that you can go into it not feeling like you are wondering why this is happening, why that's happening. I'm going to cover all of that and probably more, and there's going to be Q&A as well. But yeah, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, it's too late to join the live session, don't worry, just do the sign up and you'll get the recording straight through to your inbox.
That's awesome. What you're offering sounds like a great jumping off point, right, for folks.
Yeah, thanks.
Shall we get on to the episode?
Yeah, let's get on to the episode, because people are going to need this, because I think this is coming out just before Thanksgiving and we've got Christmas coming up and all sorts. So yeah, let's dive in.
This week we are, when this episode goes live, it is going to be right on the cusp of Thanksgiving. One of the themes that we talk about a lot when we're together is around people who have fatphobic family members, right? I mean, this is a year-round problem with friends, and like I know you talk about this a lot, like fat phobia within friend circles, but I guess with this episode we're specifically talking about once we go back to like our family of origin, that we might not see consistently throughout the year, or might not have seen them for a while, and we're kind of dreading it because maybe our body's changed, and we're going to be back into those conversations around the table about food and bodies.
Yeah, and I think also it's quite often families that aren't ours. It might be, our in-laws, it might be friends. I know that a lot of people will go and they'll join their families together with friendship groups, and I think people try to make sure that people aren't on their own. And quite often I've heard in other groups where people have said, oh, I've been invited to my friends, but with her family or with his family, and I don't know anyone around the table, and I'm not really sure if I'm going to be the biggest person in the room, the only person who isn't steeped in diet culture. I don't know what their views are. I don't know whether we align, and you can't really kind of ask ahead, I guess. So there's lots of situations where this might be difficult, which is why we wanted to dive into it.
Yeah, as well as the situations where you absolutely flipping know it's going to be fatphobic and filled with diet culture. Like, you just know ahead of the game. So like, I think today we wanted to talk about, and we don't kind of normally do this really. We're mainly about like naming things and like having a lot of understanding and compassion and validating people's experiences on this podcast, right? Which we'll do today, but we're going to talk a bit more about strategy, because I think people want something to do and to think about that's going to be really helpful. So yeah, let's kick off. And I think it probably begins from before we actually, like, when we know it's coming up, before we actually get into that situation, what kind of things can we do ahead of time that might be helpful coming into that?
Yeah, I think it's, like you say, normally we're talking about naming stuff, but not necessarily strategy. But I think for this time of year, I think it's useful to have a bit of strategy, because it can be really exhausting. And I had this conversation with a client of mine this week where she was saying, like, I actually just get so frustrated every time I hear a fatphobic comment or something that's like really steeped in diet culture, or someone's commenting on their food, and I just want to scream. And it can be like that. But if you're in that container for maybe a few days, sharing meals together, that's going to be really, really intense. So it's like, how do we protect our energy before we go? How do we kind of put things in place before we get there? How do we survive the actual event and then kind of coming out the other side of it? Because and it's not a one size fits all. So it's just going to be a real
No,
take
it's
what
not.
works for you. And this is just based on what we've experienced, what our clients have experienced. So
Yeah.
hopefully it will help in some way to get through this time of year.
And also to add to that list of like protect our recovery, our
Yeah,
healing, right? So for those of you listening to the
absolutely.
podcast that are like, trying on for size, how it might feel to separate from diet culture, how it might feel to step into this like idea of being more accepting in your body and trying to be more kind and nurturing around your relationship with food. It can really derail that when we step into these situations. And I actually want to call out, and I say this with love and with so much empathy, but what I see and hear in my coaching practice time and time again is fat phobic mothers.
Yes.
This is not to have a go at mothers. It's not to have
No.
it's the hardest job in the world, right? I'm not a mother. That's probably why, right? It is a hard job.
You got a glimpse of it, right? When you came to stay with me.
I did. It's like, I don't know how people do it. But what I hear is women my age, younger, older, even women into, their 50s who still have parents around that still feel like they regress back to being a child when they are around their parents, and they feel like they have to fall in line. They want to meet their approval. They want to feel loved. And so much of that, we feel like we have to conform to what their expectations are or what their beliefs are around food and body. It's really, really hard and to set boundaries with mothers, right? Mothers are so influential on our understanding around this. Even when we intellectually can say that's fucked up, we still feel ourselves drawn into it. And it's really, really frustrating. It's probably one of the biggest things nowadays that I work with clients around, actually, because when we talk about like, where do these beliefs come from? Why do we feel where it points to a lot of the time?
It does. And also grandmothers and just kind of that female lead in the family. I think it comes from a lot of those. And I think, where they stand or what they've been, their relationship with their body and what they expect yours to be with. But also I think sometimes, a lot of these stories that we have are, I think Siobhan talked about it in her episode, with being taken to slimming clubs with the the parent, the caregiver, the mum, the grandmother, all that kind of stuff. And that is quite often a really common story. But also, if that person has seen you as a dieter, whether it started when you were young due to them kind of putting you on a diet, they still know you as a dieter and somebody who is maybe obsessed with their weight and obsessed with food, and they will keep it's undoing that kind of stuff. And when they see you changing and doing something different and stepping away from something that they might still be really deeply committed to, I think that can be really, really hard on both sides. I think that's really triggering. I had a client who her mum would call her every week and ask her what her weight was. It's that ingrained, but she had always answered that question. This was new, excuse me, for her to not answer that question and not want to talk about it. So it's the mother's like, well, hang on, this is what I always ask you. This is just what I always ask you.
And when you start to maybe like put boundaries in place, or your identity starts to kind of shift away from that, the fat phobic influencer can double down. Right. Because it triggers when essentially when you set a boundary, or you start to kind of try to neutralize or not answer the questions, even if you don't address it overtly, there's this kind of like feeling brought up by the people who have committed their life to diet culture, right? And I've said this before, but it's like, people don't like to hear that it's all been for nothing. People don't like to hear that the person that they have like birthed and raised are finding their own identity and it's different from theirs.
Yeah.
So it makes people double down and probe and ask more questions. And for somebody who's new in recovery or new to this work, it can be really triggering. I hear all the time from folks like, I don't have the language. I don't feel like I understand enough or can
Yeah.
articulate well enough what this work is. I've had people come to the end of my 8-week group programs and being like, how do I even begin to explain to somebody what we've been doing for the last 8 weeks?
Because it's entirely anti-cultural, right? It's a
Yeah.
message that, I think when you're inside diet culture, and I think if I look back to when I was inside diet culture, deeply inside it, if you'd have talked to me about not doing it, that all I would have heard is giving up on myself, letting go of myself, and allowing myself to be something that I had feared being. And how would that be healthy or good? And it's this, you get the concern trolling, don't you? I'm just worried about your health. I'm just worried about this. I'm just worried about that. And I think also there's the bonding as well. If you have gone to slimming clubs together, if you have swapped recipes every, year, if you have been the ones around the table who have had a separate meal and that isn't, cooked with all the oils and all the things that everybody else is having, it can be that loss of that connection and knowing what to put in place, because you haven't had to try and put anything else in place. It's not that you haven't got anything in common. It's just that has been the thing for maybe decades.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's absolutely true. And what I hear a lot from clients is, and I've experienced this truthfully, it's like the realization of, I can't have the kind of relationship that I really want with my mother or my aunt or my grandmother or whoever it is, or my friend, because this is probably always going to be in their life and they need to come to this on their own terms. Like I'm not into this idea of like pushing health at every size or pushing anti-diet on other people. Like, I hate stuff being pushed on me. I will probably run in the other direction if somebody tries to push something on me. So people have to come to it in their own time, but there is a real, I think often when I speak to clients, it starts off with this, like, as you say, frustration and anger, and then it moves into just actually what I feel, because like anger is second emotion, right? It's there's always stuff underneath it, and when you peel that back, it's like, what's the emotions? And I think a lot of the time it's sadness and disappointment that we can kind of see our parents clearly as like flawed people in the nicest possible way, and has kind of indoctrinated us into this world that we now don't want to be part of. And it just feels really sad that we can't have that bonding, as you say, and connection through that thing anymore. And that's really hard. It is grief to kind of be like, okay, well, I'm not going to have that relationship anymore.
It is grief. And I also think there's another layer above maybe the food and body image stuff. And that, I think, for me, is the tougher part, is the kind of, you realize once you start learning about systems of oppression and all the other systemic issues that kind of are intertwined and how diet culture is reinforced, you actually realize that it's a lot more than your viewpoints on food and body that differ. And that's challenging too. That's probably, I think, just speaking from real personal experience, that is probably more of the challenging part, because you realize you start to unearth the stuff you really care about and the stuff that really matters. And you realize that quite often there's people in your life, people in your family, people in your, that whoever it is that you're connected to, that we are talking about in this situation, that you are not aligned and you are very far removed. And actually it's so difficult. This might have to be another conversation for another day, but there's like things that are said, like like I've had that question of like, well, how do you come to this idea that the BMI is racist? Like, I haven't just come to this idea. It's like I have unpacked my own stuff, and I have read some stuff, and I've understood some stuff in a different way, and I've open up you're more receptive to understanding stuff and looking at it from a different way and questioning stuff like, well, why do we think that? Why do we think that men should have larger portions of food than women. Like, there's so much more to it. There's so much more that comes out. I'm being cautious because I'm like,
you don't want to say maybe this needs to be
not
a
like
behind
upset
the
my
scenes,
entire family right now,
but behind the scenes episode.
Yeah, that's gonna happen.
Thank you for naming like this idea that this isn't like we aren't just like these kind of rogue individuals like who have decided to like change our mindset around this stuff. What you've just named is diet culture is a system of oppression. What we're talking about here is actually waking up to not just this system of oppression, but all systems of oppression. And really what you're saying, I think, is this is political. Bodies are political, right? What our worldview is political. So once you start to talk about those things, right? I never sat around the dinner table talking about stuff like this with my parents, right? At all. Now I would love to. Now, like, I'm so intrigued as to like how all these different like systemic fat phobia and everything else like influences so much of our culture, right? But then you do get into talking about things like the environmental crisis, right? Climate change.
Yep.
You start getting into gender stuff, right? You start getting into sexuality. You start getting into
racism, ableism. You're going into all of it,
and like poverty, who's in power, all of it.
And if you've never been having those conversations with your family members, if actually you've only ever really had surface level conversations with them about food, about bodies, about the kind of whether they went to little Sainsbury's today, it's going to be hard. Like that's always going to be a hard thing to do. So it's and they'll see that change, and it might make them feel uncomfortable. And I know we're diving down a rabbit hole, but I just think it's really important that we talk about that, like beyond what's being served at the dinner table, because it's way more than that.
Oh, it's way more than that for sure. We said we were going to talk about strategy, and we haven't started timing this episode, as we never do. So let's crack on and look at strategy. I think the first thing that comes to mind in terms of planning ahead is actually thinking like how much time is doable, right? Like I think a lot of the time parents or whatever will have this plan and be like, so you can arrive on that day and you can leave on that day, but actually like thinking like what's doable for me, what sort of time scale feels like I can like turn up and be present and engage, and it not feel like I'm in the danger zone for too long.
And also exhausting your energy and depleting yourself, because if it's not filling your cup, if there's an element of it, it's more I wouldn't want to say duty, because I don't think that's fair, but I suppose for some people it might feel like that. But that's kind of the same thing.
Similar.
I'm just thinking like, I don't want it to be all doom and gloom, because you might really be looking forward to it, and you might not mind spending time there at all. But even if you do, I think it is worth knowing what is your limit, so that you don't end up in the point where you just can't wait. You're counting down the hours and minutes until you can leave. What is doable. And thinking about that ahead of time, because I think sometimes, especially if you're quite far away from family members who are in that situation, if they are quite fat phobic and quite stuck in diet culture, when you might be in your own bubble, you might have a circle of friends who are all kind of aligned with you, and then you go and step back in and you almost forget, and then you're like, oh yeah, I forgot because I was in my like safety zone in my bubble. And you might have got to the point where you've surrounded yourself with people who are on board, who at least understand it from your perspective, even if they're not 100% in it themselves, that they know that that's where you're coming from, and they know what is okay to talk about and what isn't. But it's like really kind of start thinking about that before you go, because it'll creep up, and then it'll be like, oh gosh, why did I say I was going to go for 5 days when actually really I know that 3 is my limit? And
similarly, if you're the host, right, not just if you're a visitor, but if you're a host, like how like trying to be really, really firm and set that boundary and say, that's actually true. Like 3 days is doable for me rather than 5. And then the next thing I think is like where can you find an ally in that space?
Yeah.
So sometimes like I hear people saying like, I'm taking a friend as a buffer, right? Even if it's just for a dinner with like parents, I'm roping in a friend to just be that buffer. Or what it might mean is if you have a partner, and I think maybe we actually could do a whole episode on I people have actually written to us and asked us to do this about like, how do I get my partner on side or just understanding or respectful of this work, right? So that's another episode. But let's go on the assumption that your partner might not fully understand or might not fully be on board, but they're definitely respectful of your decisions. They want to be supportive of this kind of new path that you're exploring. Can you use them as an ally so that they can kind of step in if you're feeling like you're really being kind of targeted, or there's like some comments coming your way? Can you get a partner on side to intercept, or even just be the person behind the scenes to support you, right?
Yeah, because if you're sat around the table or you're in somebody's house or they're in your house, and you know, we've talked about this in a medical situation, it's kind of separate, but when you are being targeted, when you know, they feel the conversation is kind of really focused on you, we always think like, oh, I'm going to say this, or I'm going to say that. Quite often we say nothing. Quite
Oh
often
yeah,
it's just like zilch. And I know we've had
totally.
that conversation before a few
Yeah.
times between the two of us. And so having someone there, whether it's your partner, you know, I have this conversation with my husband before we go anywhere. Like, if we start diving down to this, can you just like steer it away? Because one, I don't want to be rude either if it's not my family, if it's his side of the family or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
But also don't want to always be the bad guy or always be the one who's calling people out
Sensitive.
on their fat phobia, or being sensitive, whatever it might
Yeah.
be. You can feel uncomfortable, and quite often that freeze, you know, that real kind of rabbit in the headlights, it's so normal to feel like that. But
Totally.
having someone there who's on side, even a sibling or another family member who's going, who maybe suffers under the same scrutiny, that maybe you could
Yeah.
kind of like collude together. I mean, obviously we don't know everyone's family dynamics, just throwing out ideas out there, but maybe start thinking about that
Yeah.
before you go, before they
Yeah.
come, before they arrive, or whatever happens.
Yeah, who can you get on side?
Yeah,
Those conversations beforehand is
yeah,
so helpful, just because sometimes our partners like don't, especially if they're not like deep in this work, they sometimes maybe think that some comments are, oh God, really, like that's not very harmful, that they're just having a
yeah,
laugh, they're just joking about. But it's like you're absolutely right. When you start to feel shame, it mutes you,
yeah,
right? Your
yeah, it
heart's
does.
racing. You're just like, oh my God, I feel like, just in their eyes, a disappointment, a failure. My body's, a bad body, all of that kind of thing. And we start to like lose that like anti-diet warrior inside us, and we
Yeah,
start to just sink into that like feeling of shame. So yeah,
yeah,
if we can have somebody else on side, I think that's really helpful. And also like, and again, this might sound really obvious, but like, how are you going to take care of yourself
yeah,
during it? And this, do you know what? This extends way beyond food and body stuff. This is just like being in someone else's house or hosting someone, being around people for like 4 or 5 days. I find that exhausting, truthfully.
yeah,
It doesn't matter if there's diet talk on the table or not, but especially if you're dealing with a fat phobic mother or family member who is like side glancing how much food you're putting on your plate, who's making a snide comment if you between meals go into the kitchen and want a snack, the type of snack, whatever it is, any kind of those like really sly under the radar kind of comments. It's exhausting. How do you take care of yourself? You're the queen of self-care. What would you suggest?
definitely going out. Honestly, going out and having a walk, having the dog. Oh, I need to walk the dog. It's like, it's just been a game changer.
Yeah.
That dog has just saved me. But no, I think going out for a walk, you know, and don't feel obliged to like invite everybody, because that can be exhausting as well. Even try to go for a family walk when everybody's trying to, oh my gosh, honestly, like it's so hard. But yeah, getting out, but also just, I mean, go and read a book, go and listen to a podcast, put ours on, you know, come and listen to some anti-diet stuff, you know, or get another one, or find Audible, you know, some of the Audible books, you know, and especially like anti-diet books that I've listened to are so much better on Audible, because you really kind of understand like how they want you to hear it. Like I love
Having
those.
somebody in your ear.
Yeah, something like that. Just taking like a few minutes to yourself, take an extra 10 minutes in the shower, take an extra 10 minutes in the loo. Like, you know, you can excuse yourself. The amount of times I've gone to the toilet when I don't need the toilet is unbelievable. Because it just gives you like that moment just to gather your thoughts, just to breathe in, breathe out, recenter. Yeah. And if you can really take time, if they're used to you kind of saying, oh, I've just got to pop out and get something, like, you know, if somebody needs some milk, volunteer to go to the shop by yourself, be the person who does it.
And it's
that can give
okay
you
to
some time.
say, it's okay to say I need some alone time. I never realized for a long time that it's okay to say, do you know what, I'm used to being around people all the time. Like I just like need some time to myself, and asking for that is okay. And having like a friend on the end of the phone, right, who you can, and sometimes if that friend is like not available to talk, send them a voice note, like talk into your phone, send
like we do,
like exactly
voice notes all day long.
The time. It's like if somebody's not available, just like this idea of talking it out, inventing it to essentially nobody, because you're talking into your phone, but you are talking to your friend. Do that. I all my private clients, I offer WhatsApp support in between our sessions. I know you do too. So like quite often I'll get texts or voice notes from clients just saying like, you know, I know it's like you might you know be able to answer this today, but this is, I just need to name what I'm experiencing. And for me to get back and just like be that person to validate and be like, yeah, that's really rough. That and also like the validation part for somebody else to hear what you're going through and say, actually, that's not okay. Like that comment that your mum said, or that whatever, that's not cool. That's not okay.
You're not being oversensitive.
You're not being
oversensitive. It's holding that space for somebody. And I think, you know, my top tip, if you are going to use voice notes, is to before you or after you've sent the voice note, like immediately after, write in it, you don't need to listen to this urgently, unless they do, obviously. And don't listen to this around other people or kids, because quite often I swear, and quite often it's a rant. And I sometimes do that with you. If it's not something urgent, like about the podcast, about something else, I'll put on there, this is not for now, not urgent, listen to it when you get a chance, make sure there's no one else around. And that just gives that person permission, because I know some people I mean, I don't do this, but quite often people will think they have to listen to something straight away, or they say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't listen to a message straight away. And I think that's fine. You don't need to apologize. Like it's okay not to be available all the time. That's why, like, if you send a voice note, especially if it's like Thanksgiving or Christmas or a time when people are with their own families, you might feel guilty about encroaching on their time and their time with their family, but you're not. If you're just leaving them a voice message, they can just pick up at any point. It's not urgent, then it's you're giving them that permission to not listen to it straight away.
I'll often preface it by saying vent incoming warning. So people know what
I know. I tend to take mine onto social media like TikTok and stuff like that, and do it there. It's perfect. It's perfect having social media as part of work.
But I think what we're saying is like community is really important. So whether you're like part of a Facebook group or even though social media can be like, you know, problematic, even just as you say, when you go to the toilet, logging on to Instagram and maybe like going straight to the accounts that you know you're going to feel seen, you're going to feel validated, it's going to anchor you back into that, like sometimes anger, right, of like this is not okay,
or go and
a
find
problem.
the joy. I'm telling you honestly, TikTok has so much plus size you know, fat joy in it. It just lights up my day with people showing off their outfits and, you know, this is what I wear, this is what I'm wearing today, and it just makes me smile. I'm just like, yes, there are people with a stomach, with thighs, with a body, just living really, really happy, and I blimmin' love it. And if I need a little fix, I'll go and just hang out there for helpful. 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes, and you'll be smiling and you'll be knowing that actually, like, whatever body size you're in is fine. It's absolutely fine.
You're not a problem. You're absolutely
not your body is not the problem.
So if you're listening to this podcast in the toilet when you're like trying to get away from family members, you are not a problem. Your body is not a problem. Just play that over and over.
I love it.
The other thing I want to name, because I think like boundaries is a whole other thing that we need to do a whole other
Yeah.
episode on. But what I want to name, where I see people getting tripped up, is this feeling of, I need to bolster myself enough, and I need to get I need to like brush up on my almost like elevator pitch of anti-diet, of health at every size,
Yeah.
of like in defense of like anti-diet, or like why the BMI is
Yeah.
trash, right? I need to like have it all stored up ready to go. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's a lot of pressure, right? And given that what we've said is, when you're in these situations, all that often goes out your brain, and you're completely
Yeah.
back into this place of like feeling really, really vulnerable. So you do not have to be the educator, especially when you're new to this work. It's not on you to be the educator. There's a big impulse to be like, oh, I've discovered this whole new world, and I've learned all these new things, and like, if only this person knew about it, right? Then there's this urgency to kind of get people on side, get their buy-in. And
Yeah.
that is exhausting. It's a lot of work. As I said earlier, people come to this in their own time. You can't really educate someone without their permission, right?
Yeah.
And when you try and do that, people can get prickly and defensive, and it can come back at you, and it can
Yeah.
actually make you feel worse
And
because they've doubled down on it.
I have done that, and it has, and I learn very quickly. And
Yeah.
you just think, once you're seeing, the freedom of it and the benefits of it, there is an urgency. You want to get people on board. And you think, if I just tell them this thing, they might just get it, and then we can just stop having this conversation, and they'll be more interested. It just, yeah, like you say, it backfires quite often.
Yeah.
And it's not your job. And also, I think sometimes we can get a little bit sort of feeling like we need to be all up in the stats and the history and this, that, and that's quite hard to remember if it's not something you naturally remember. I'm not really naturally good with things like that. So I steer clear of doing that. Like that, in the moment, I'm just going to end up looking like I don't know what I'm talking about, because I don't hold that information. Just kind of bring it back to your own experience. And if you need to say something, what you can say is something very simple, such as, I find that when I focus on my body and food, it causes more problems than it solves. And actually, I'm just trying to take a break from, or trying to have a better relationship with food. Just something very simple, because, and I come back to this a lot, I think it's sometimes a shock for people to find out that you weren't enjoying restricting your food. I know it was such a shock for my husband when I told him the actual reality of what dieting was like for me, because I hid it so well. I wanted to make it look easy. That was just part of the facade. That was part of the thing. He had zero idea, and helping him understand that that was actually quite traumatic, quite painful, and caused more problems than it solved. He got it, and was able to understand it at that point. I don't think we need to feel that we have to do anything beyond that. There's one other thing I want to draw attention to. I know we didn't talk about this in terms of what we were going to discuss today, but it's on the same theme. Don't feel like you have to justify how you eat or how healthy you are. I see people do this all the time. They just want to scream from the inside, but I still go to the gym. I still exercise. I eat salad sometimes. I actually crave it sometimes. And you feel like you want to shout it, and you feel like you want to prove that you haven't just given up on yourself, that you haven't let yourself go. Save your energy. Save your energy. I promise you. You don't owe anyone that explanation. I just wanted to drop that in on.
That's really helpful. Like, absolutely. We're not, just to reiterate, it's not your job to get their buy-in or to make them understand. What you're actually asking for when you say one of these things, as you say, like, actually, can we not talk about bodies, or can we not talk about food? What you're doing is you're just asking for somebody's respect. You're not trying to get their buy-in. You're not trying to get them to understand. You're just saying, this isn't helpful for me right now. Could you respect that? That's it. And sometimes people are going to ask questions about that. Well, why? You were always the dieter. What's changed? Right? And it's easy to get dragged into those conversations, and really, like, just try and not go there, especially if you're new to this work, you don't want to cause a rupture around the Christmas table or the Thanksgiving table, right? Just try and say, yeah, I'm just finding like I'm taking a break from focusing on that. I'm finding it more distressing than helpful. Can we not talk about it? And then as soon as somebody's like, but why? But why? Like, but how? What's changed? It's like, we're talking about it. Can we not talk about it?
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe those discussions happen later, a less kind of
one-to-one,
less of
maybe
an
when you haven't got,
occasion.
yeah, so many people on the table. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
exactly.
Great.
So is that everything we want to
I think
chat? Do you feel like
so. I
that's...
think so. I think there's quite a lot of information. I think, we're always here. If you want to fire us a question, you can do that through the Instagram handle, and we pretty much answer every single one. So,
Yeah.
we'll come
Unless
back
you're
to you with
coming to us
anything.
with dieting stuff that we get a lot.
We
Did
do
you
get a
see
bit
that
of that.
email that I sent recently? Hang on, I'm gonna... Sorry, I
Bless
just
you.
sneezed.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
we
we do get
get
a bit of that,
so
don't we?
many
People who
emails of
are,
people wanting to come on as a guest, and then we look at their bio and it's like they're anti-diet, but they're selling weight loss.
yeah,
So we don't answer those.
we
Well, I did
screen
answer.
things quite heavily, to say the
Absolutely.
least, don't
Yeah.
we? Yeah, yeah.
But try
No,
and
I
have a
think
great
that's,
try and have a
yeah,
great
sorry.
time. If you are going to families or friends, like as Tamsin said, like there is so much joy to be had. So hopefully you can lean into that. And
Mm.
yeah, we will see you on the next episode. If this has been helpful for you, what we would absolutely love in return is for you to review the podcast, or even
Yeah.
like click the 5-star thing. You don't even have to type a comment. We love comments, but just hit the 5-star thing. It helps other people find the podcast, which is so great and exciting for us, and hopefully helps other people. And find us on Instagram. And is that everything?
I think so. Yeah. If you want to work with us, you can find all our details in the show notes. We're both anti-diet coaches. We have various different programs like separately going on, and free webinars and all sorts of stuff. So go check us out and come and find us if you need further support.
All right. I'll catch you next time.